Look, I know what you're thinking. A 15-year-old kid taking on the biggest, meanest bullies in the high school? It's like something out of a bad movie, right? But the thing is, sometimes when you're pushed, and I mean really pushed past your breaking point, when you've been made to feel smaller and more insignificant than the dirt on someone's boot for years, you don't just break, you change, you evolve. You find a side of yourself you never knew existed, a cold, calculating part that just takes over. And that's exactly what happened to me. So before you judge, before you hear the rest of this and tell me I went too far, I want you to look me in the eye, so to speak, and ask yourself this one simple, honest question. What would you do if your entire world had become a living hell and you finally saw a way out? Just one way out, and it required you to do something terrible. Was I wrong for what I did? Honestly, I still don't know the answer to that myself. But let me tell you my story from the very beginning, and maybe you can help me figure it out. My name's Alex. Back then, I was the walking definition of easy target. 5'4", maybe 100 pounds soaking wet, with thick glasses that always seemed to be sliding down my nose. I was that kid, the one who was invisible to the cool kids, a non-entity to the popular girls, and a punchline for the jocks. And at the top of the high school food chain were my absolute worst nightmares, Kyle and his twin goons, Ben and Tyler. These guys were everything I wasn't, tall, broad-shouldered, and just mean. Especially Kyle. He was the ringleader, the quarterback of the football team, the golden boy who could do no wrong in the eyes of the teachers. But to me, he was a monster. They didn't just bully me, they systematically dismantled my life, piece by excruciating piece. It wasn't just the name calling, the shoved in lockers, the accidentally tripped in the hallway stuff, though God knows there was plenty of that. No, they were more creative than that. They made it their mission to humiliate me, to make me a laughingstock, to ensure that every single day I woke up dreading the sheer fact of my own existence. I remember this one time in the cafeteria. It was a Tuesday. I'll never forget it. I was minding my own business, trying to finish my history homework before class. Suddenly, I felt something wet and sticky hit the back of my neck. I spun around, and there was Kyle, a smirk plastered on his punchable face, holding an empty ketchup bottle. He just emptied the whole thing on me. My new shirt, my backpack, everything, soaked in red. The whole cafeteria went silent for a second, then erupted in laughter. It was like a tidal wave of humiliation. I just sat there, my face burning, fighting back tears, as Kyle and his buddies high-fived each other. "Look, guys, Alex is bleeding," Tyler had shouted, and the laughter got even louder. It was the same story every day. My gym clothes would mysteriously disappear, only to be found in the boys' bathroom urinal. My notebooks would get ripped up. I'd find disgusting things taped to the inside of my locker. And the worst part? Nobody did anything. The teachers would just roll their eyes and say boys will be boys, or tell me to toughen up. The other kids, the ones who weren't in Kyle's circle, were just too scared to get involved. They'd look away, pretend they didn't see anything, thankful it wasn't them this time. And I get it, I really do. But it made the isolation feel so much worse. I tried talking to my parents, of course. My mom was always sympathetic, but my dad, he was a firm believer in the tough it out school of thought. "You can't let them see they're getting to you, son," he'd say without looking up from his newspaper. "Stand tall, don't be a victim." As if it was that simple. As if you could just decide not to be terrified when a guy twice your size is cornering you in an empty hallway. My sister, Sarah, was the only one who really got it. She'd seen Kyle in action. "He's a psychopath, Alex," she'd tell me, her eyes filled with worry. "You have to get out of there. Tell the principal, file a report, do something." But I knew that wouldn't work. The principal, Mr. Henderson, was Kyle's uncle. Yeah, you read that right. Talk about a stacked deck. Any complaint I made would just get lost or dismissed as a silly misunderstanding. And then Kyle would find out and the bullying would just get 10 times worse. I was trapped.
And then came the big game. It was the homecoming football match, the biggest social event of the year. My sister, Sarah, was a cheerleader, and my parents had dragged me along to watch her. I hated football, but I hated Kyle even more, and seeing him play was a special kind of torture. He was the star, the town hero. Everyone was chanting his name, wearing jerseys with his number. It made me want to puke. But about midway through the second quarter, something incredible happened. Kyle, running with the ball, got absolutely leveled by a linebacker from the opposing team. It was a brutal, legal hit, and he went down hard. For a moment, the whole stadium was silent. Then, a collective gasp as Kyle didn't get up. He was clutching his knee, rolling on the ground in agony. I remember a strange sensation washing over me. It wasn't happiness, not exactly. It was more like a profound sense of justice, a feeling that, for once, the world was making sense. The coaches and trainers rushed onto the field. They loaded Kyle onto a stretcher and carted him off amidst a standing ovation of concern. The news spread quickly through the stands. It was a bad one. A torn ACL, meniscus damage, the whole works. He was out for the season and probably the next one too. For the first time in my life, I saw a flicker of hope. With Kyle out, maybe things would change. Maybe the rest of the team would lose their edge. Maybe, just maybe, I could catch a break. But boy, was I wrong. If I thought Kyle was bad, wait until you meet injured, bitter Kyle. His entire identity was football. It was his ticket out of our small town, his claim to fame. Without it, he was lost and furious. And you want to know who became the primary target of that fury? That's right, me. It started my first day back after the weekend. I was at my locker, and I felt a heavy hand on my shoulder. I spun around, and there was Kyle, on crutches, his face contorted in a sneer. Ben and Tyler were looming behind him, looking even bigger than usual. "Enjoying your little celebration, Alex?" he spat, his voice low and dangerous. I was confused. "What? No. Before I could finish, he slammed his crutch into my locker just inches from my face. The sound was deafening in the crowded hallway. "You think this is funny? You think it's funny I might never play again?" I stammered, terrified. "No, of course not. I never said that." But he wasn't listening. "Well, let me tell you something, you little piece of trash," he continued, leaning in so close I could smell his minty breath. "Since you're so smart, you're going to make yourself useful. You're going to do my homework, all of it, and you'd better not screw it up, or you'll wish you were the one on crutches." And with that, he shoved me into my locker and limped away, leaving me shaking, my heart pounding in my chest. That was the beginning of my new normal. It was even worse than before. Not only was I still getting physically pushed around by Ben and Tyler, but now I had a new full-time job doing Kyle's homework. And let me tell you, Kyle was no scholar. He was failing almost everything, and the pressure on me was immense. I was staying up to 2 or 3 in the morning every night doing double the homework, mine and his. My grades started to slip. I was constantly exhausted. My eyes were perpetually bloodshot, and I was living in a constant state of panic. If I didn't get his assignments perfect, he'd find some new, twisted way to punish me. Once, when I got a B on a history paper I'd slaved over, he cornered me in the stairwell and made me watch as Ben and Tyler tore up my favorite sketchbook, piece by piece, laughing the whole time. It was soul-crushing. But the final straw, the thing that truly pushed me over the edge, wasn't even about the homework or the physical bullying. It was about something much more personal. I have this sister, Sarah, remember? She's smart, funny, and beautiful. And Kyle, well, Kyle had a thing for her. He'd been trying to get her attention for years, but Sarah was way too smart to fall for his act. She'd always turn him down, politely but firmly. But with his injury, Kyle's obsession with her took a darker turn. He saw her as something he was entitled to, a prize he deserved. He started sending her disturbing texts, leaving weird messages on her social media. Sarah was terrified. She told her parents, but again, they didn't take it seriously enough. "He's just a boy with a crush, Sarah," my dad had said. "He'll grow out of it." And Sarah, who was always so strong, was starting to fall apart. I could see the fear in her eyes every time she came home, the way she'd scan the room before entering. It made my blood boil. These animals were targeting me? Fine, I could handle it. I had been handling it. But when they started messing with my sister, that was crossing a line I never thought I'd draw. I knew I couldn't go to the teachers. I couldn't go to my parents. I was completely on my own. And that's when the idea first started to take shape. It wasn't a fully formed plan at first, just a whisper of a thought, a wild, crazy possibility. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I had everything I needed. See, because I was constantly doing Kyle's homework, I was forced to use his student portal logins and passwords. I had complete access to his entire academic record. I saw his dismal grades, his attendance record, his teacher comments. I saw everything. And that's when it hit me. Kyle wasn't just some dim-witted jock. He was desperate. The university he'd been recruited to, the one with the huge football program that had offered him a full scholarship, wasn't just interested in his athletic ability. They were a serious academic institution, and they had strict academic standards. I knew this because Kyle, in a rare moment of lucidity, had bragged to me about it back when he first got the offer. "They're really strict, Alex," he'd said, "but I've got my uncle looking out for me. He's gonna pull some strings." It was a classic Kyle move, cheating and using his connections to get ahead. But I saw an opening. I knew that the athletic department and the admissions office at the university were two separate entities, and the admissions office wouldn't be as easily manipulated by a small-town high school principal. They had an integrity to maintain. My plan began to form. It was dangerous, it was risky, and if I got caught, it would be all over for me. I could get expelled, maybe even face legal charges. But the alternative, a life of constant fear and abuse while watching my sister suffer, was simply not an option. So I started working. Not on Kyle's homework, but on my masterpiece. I spent hours in the library using the most obscure and untraceable computer terminals I could find. I created a new anonymous email address. I did meticulous research on the university's admissions procedures. I read their entire code of conduct, their policies on academic integrity. I learned about their disciplinary committee. I was methodical. I was thorough. I knew I couldn't just tell them Kyle was a bully. That wouldn't work. It would look like a petty, personal vendetta. I needed something bigger, something that would hit them where it hurts. I needed to expose him as what he truly was, a fraud, a cheat. I remembered all those nights I spent doing his homework. I remembered all the tests he'd somehow passed with suspiciously good grades. I knew I couldn't prove I did his homework, but I could prove something else. I remembered a conversation I'd overheard Kyle having with Ben and Tyler a long time ago, before his injury. They were laughing about a paper he'd turned in for his AP English class, a paper that had gotten him an A. "Man, that essay writing website is the best $50 I ever spent," he'd boasted. My memory, sharpened by years of abuse, was a library of his misdeeds. I went back to the library, I found the essay writing website he'd mentioned, and sure enough, with a little digging, I found the paper he'd purchased. It was a perfect match for the one he'd submitted. This was it, the smoking gun. But it wasn't enough. I needed more. I remembered hearing about another incident from a former teammate of Kyle's, about a math test Kyle had allegedly found answers to online. It was a standardized state test, which made it even more serious. Again, I went back to work. It took me weeks, but I finally found the answers he had used on an obscure forum. It was a puzzle, and I was putting all the pieces together. And that's when I found the pièce de résistance. Remember that big football game where Kyle got injured? It turns out that whole uncle pulling strings business was a lot deeper than I thought. I was digging through the high school's internal system. Don't ask how, let's just say my computer skills were far superior to anything they had protecting their data, and I found some emails between Mr. Henderson and the university's recruitment office. In them, Mr. Henderson was aggressively downplaying Kyle's academic troubles, going as far as to suggest that some of his teachers were biased against him. He was essentially a co-conspirator in Kyle's grand charade. This wasn't just about Kyle anymore. This was about a whole system of corruption that was protecting him. I had everything. The plagiarized paper, the cheated test, the emails from Mr. Henderson. It was a powerful, devastating file. All I had to do was press send. But that's when the doubts started to creep in. Was I really going to do this? Was I going to destroy someone's life? Even someone like Kyle? I mean, yeah, he was a monster, but this was his entire future, his dreams, his hopes, everything. Was I any better than him if I did this? I started thinking about all the times I wished someone would stand up for me. And now, here I was, about to become the person who was standing up for me and my sister. But at what cost? So that's the situation I was in, and I had to make a choice. A choice between continuing to suffer, to watch my sister live in fear, or to become the instrument of my own and her salvation. But that salvation came with a price tag, a heavy one. Before I tell you what happened next, what I finally decided to do, I want you to pause and comment below what you would have done in my shoes. Would you have hit send and destroyed everything? Or would you have chosen to walk away, to keep taking the punches, to protect whatever shred of innocence you had left? Think about it and tell me. I really want to know. I sat there in that cold, fluorescent-lit library, my finger hovering over the mouse. The cursor was on the send button. The email was ready. All the attachments were uploaded. The subject line was simple: important information regarding a potential student-athlete's academic record. I could feel my heart pounding against my ribs, a manic drum roll. My breath was shallow. I looked around the library. A few students were studying. A librarian was shelving books. To them, it was just another ordinary Tuesday afternoon. To me, it was the precipice of a cliff. I closed my eyes and pictured Sarah's face. I pictured the terror in her eyes when she got one of Kyle's texts. I pictured the way she'd flinch when anyone mentioned his name. And then I pictured Kyle's face, the smug smirk, the way he'd look at me with that look of utter contempt. I remembered the ketchup, the ripped sketchbook, the constant fear. And that's when I knew I had to do it. Not for me, but for Sarah, for every other kid in that school who was living in terror of Kyle and his friends. This wasn't revenge, it was justice, a necessary, brutal kind of justice. I opened my eyes, took a deep breath, and clicked. And then I waited. For days, nothing happened. Life went on as usual. Kyle still limped through the halls, a slightly muted version of his former self, but still a bully. Ben and Tyler were still his enforcers. I still did his homework. I was a nervous wreck, jumping at every noise, convinced that any moment the police would burst into my classroom and haul me away. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I was living in a constant state of hyper-alertness. And then, about a week later, it all blew up. It was a Monday, and the first period bell had just rung. Our history teacher, Mr. Davies, looked more stressed than usual. He was a good guy, one of the few teachers who tried to do his job despite the dysfunction. He got up to speak, and his voice was shaking. "Class, I have some serious news to share," he began, "and I need everyone's undivided attention." The room went dead silent. Everyone knew that something major was happening. Over the weekend, a complaint was filed with the State Department of Education and with the university that recruited Kyle, he said, and my heart skipped a beat. A wave of murmurs rippled through the classroom. All eyes turned to Kyle, who was sitting at the back of the room, looking confused and slightly annoyed. Mr. Davies continued, his voice getting steadier. The complaint alleges serious academic misconduct, including plagiarism and cheating on a standardized test. The evidence provided is quite compelling. The murmurs got louder. Kyle's face was now pale, his smug smirk gone. Furthermore, Mr. Davies said, looking directly at Kyle, the university has launched its own internal investigation. This is a very serious matter, and there will be a full investigation. The news spread through the school like wildfire. It was the only thing anyone was talking about. Students were gathered in small groups, whispering and gossiping. The football team was in a state of chaos. The upcoming game was canceled. Kyle was suspended from school pending the investigation. Mr. Henderson, the principal, was suddenly on a leave of absence, which everyone knew was code for suspended and likely to be fired. It was beautiful, glorious chaos. The next few weeks were a blur. The investigation was swift and thorough. The university didn't hold back. They brought in outside investigators. They interviewed teachers, students, anyone who might know anything. Of course, I was one of the first people they wanted to talk to. I was terrified, but I had a story ready. I told them that I was forced to do Kyle's homework and that I'd seen the plagiarized paper and the cheated test. I didn't mention my elaborate plan. I didn't mention the emails. I just played the part of the scared, victimized kid. And it worked. They believed me. The final verdict was brutal. Kyle's scholarship to the university was immediately rescinded. His admission was denied. He was expelled from high school. Mr. Henderson was fired for his part in the cover-up. The teachers who had been involved were reprimanded. The entire athletic department was restructured. It was a complete and total takedown. But the aftermath wasn't a simple, satisfying victory. I had expected to feel a sense of triumphant joy, but instead I felt a strange mixture of emotions. There was relief, of course. The bullying had stopped. Sarah was safe. I could finally breathe. But there was also a lingering sense of unease. I had destroyed someone's future. I had used manipulation and deceit. Was I really any better than Kyle? My sister, Sarah, was incredibly supportive. She was so proud of me for standing up to him, but she also saw the toll it had taken on me. "You did what you had to do, Alex," she'd tell me, hugging me tightly. "We protected each other. That's all that matters." But in the quiet moments, when I was alone with my thoughts, I couldn't help but wonder.
I'd like to say that everything went back to normal, but normal was gone forever. The high school was different. The power structure had been completely dismantled. There was a new, slightly anxious atmosphere. People were quieter, more cautious. I became a bit of a local celebrity, but not in a way that felt good. People would stare at me, whispering and pointing. Some people hailed me as a hero. Others looked at me with a new, fearful kind of respect. I was no longer invisible, but the new kind of attention was almost as bad. I was now the kid who took down the golden boy. I was the personification of don't mess with the quiet ones, and that wasn't a role I ever wanted. It's been years now. I'm a man now, with a job, a life, and my own set of problems. The events of that high school year seem like a lifetime ago, but they've left an indelible mark on me. I'm a more cautious person. I'm more aware of the darkness that can lurk beneath a smooth surface. I've learned that justice can be a beautiful and terrible thing, all at once. I look back on that scrawny, terrified kid, and I don't see a hero. I see someone who was pushed to the absolute limit and found a way to survive. Someone who made a choice, a hard, ugly, necessary choice. I still don't know if I was right or wrong. Maybe there's no right answer. But I do know this. Given the choice between continuing to suffer and taking a dangerous leap into the unknown, I made the only choice I could. I chose to fight back, and in doing so, I not only saved myself and my sister, but I changed the trajectory of my entire life. So I'll ask you one final time, if you were in my shoes and you had to choose between being a victim or a destroyer, which one would you have picked? Tell me. Because honestly, sometimes in the dead of the night, I'm still not entirely sure I made the right choice. But then I look at my life now, a life free of fear, and I think maybe I did. Maybe I did. I've had a lot of time to reflect on that time in my life, and I've learned that the biggest victories often come with a heavy cost. But the most important lesson I learned is that we all have a strength inside us that we only discover when we're pushed to our breaking point.
Standing up for yourself isn't about being loud or aggressive or powerful. It's about having the courage to say enough and finding the strength to make a change, no matter how difficult or scary that change might be. I hope that by sharing this story, I can inspire some of you who might be going through something similar to find your own strength, your own way to fight back, whatever that might look like for you. You don't have to suffer in silence. There is always a way out. I'd love to know what you think of my story. Was my revenge justified? Did I go too far? Share your honest thoughts in the comments section below. I really do read every single one of them. And if you're a fan of these types of intensely personal, real-life stories, please don't forget to give this video a big like. It really helps the channel grow and lets me know what kind of content you're interested in seeing more of. Also, make sure to hit that subscribe button and click the notification bell so you never miss another single story. Thank you so much for joining me today. Your support means the world to me. I'll see you all in the next story.